I was 27, the year Monroe's bakery nearly fell apart. My grandfather, Walter Monroe, opened it back in 1959 with a second-hand oven, a dream, and the best cinnamon roll recipe this side of Vermont. My dad took over in the late 80s, turning the little shop into a town treasure. For a while, it felt like nothing could touch us. Then everything did. First came the supplier scandal. Our flour was mislabeled organic when it wasn't. Then rent shot up, and a health inspector discovered a minor issue and blew it way out of proportion. Bad press followed, and with it, a nosedive in sales. Within months, we were behind on bills, facing lawsuits, and my parents were whispering bankruptcy. I remember that night like it was stitched into my memory. My mom and dad sat across from me at our cracked kitchen table, piles of paper between us, final notices, pink slips, unopened envelopes. "We're not going to make it," Dad said, his voice shaky. My mother didn't cry. She looked tired, the kind of tired you don't sleep off. "Unless someone steps in," she said softly, looking straight at me. "Someone who understands modern markets. Someone who believes in this place." That someone was me. I had just finished my MBA in New York and was working for a promising gourmet snack startup. Long hours, great pay, fast promotions. I was thriving and completely unprepared for what they asked next. "We're not asking for charity," Dad added quickly. "You'll be a full partner. When we recover, the business will be yours. You've earned it." My mom nodded. "We'll make it official, we promise." That word, promise, it sounded like safety back then. So, I said yes. I quit my job, packed up my Manhattan apartment, and moved back into my old childhood bedroom with the peeling wallpaper and crooked window. I traded client meetings for pre-dawn baking. Every day, I woke at 4:30 a.m. and worked till close, scrubbing, scheduling, mixing dough, updating social media, rebranding signage, redesigning our loyalty program, even running deliveries in my beat-up Prius. I gave that place my blood, my time, my future. Slowly, it paid off. I revamped the product line to focus on rustic Vermont-sourced ingredients, and word spread fast. Local blogs picked us up, tourists started coming back. I hired and trained staff, created seasonal menus, and got our delivery partnership with a regional app. We even started offering gluten-free options, which brought in a whole new crowd. We clawed our way out of debt, one muffin at a time. "You saved us," my dad told me one night as we closed up. "Really, Rachel? You saved this family." My mom hugged me in the kitchen. "We'll never forget what you did." Neither would I. 4 years passed. Then, one summer morning, I finally printed the spreadsheet that showed our books balanced. We were profitable again. I stared at the numbers like they were sacred. "We did it," I whispered. Dad smiled, but something in his eyes didn't quite match. I brushed it off. We planned a small thank you party at the bakery. Local friends, longtime customers, even the mayor showed up for a quick speech. We served sparkling cider and free pastries. Everyone toasted our comeback story. Even my younger brother Evan showed up. He'd been off finding himself in Oregon for the past year and a half, backpacking and starting a podcast that never got past episode 2. Evan hadn't so much as sliced a loaf of bread in that bakery. Never once helped during the lean years. And yet, he stood in the back like some prodigal son returned. After the party, when the lights dimmed and the guests trickled out, Mom and Dad called us both into the office. "We wanted to share this with you together," Mom said, smiling. My heart raced. This was it, the official announcement. The moment they handed me the keys to the kingdom I'd saved. But instead, "We've decided to pass the bakery on to Evan," she said, almost cheerfully. I blinked. Waited for the punchline. It didn't come. Dad nodded solemnly. "You've been amazing, Rachel, truly. But Evan's the man of the family. It's time he learns the ropes. The bakery has always passed from father to son." I laughed. Not a happy laugh, more like the kind you let out when something in your brain breaks. "You promised me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You promised." Mom frowned. "Don't get emotional. You'll always have a place here." A place? Like I was a staff member, an assistant. They gave everything to Evan, just like that, and I said nothing for 1 week. Then I called a lawyer. The next morning, I didn't show up for work for the first time in 4 years. No cinnamon sugar scent clinging to my clothes, no sound of the mixer grinding behind me. I stayed in bed and stared at the ceiling, replaying every moment, every decision that led me here. The betrayal wasn't accidental. It wasn't a mistake. It was a choice, and they had chosen him. Still, I held out hope they'd call, realize what they'd done, apologize. Instead, I got a group text from Mom. Let's stay positive. So proud of our family's next chapter. Evan's first day as manager. With a photo, Evan in my apron, behind my counter, like he'd earned it. That was the moment I stopped crying. I opened my laptop. Pulled up the folder where I'd saved 4 years of my life. Every email, marketing plan, staff schedule, cost projection, vendor contract, everything I built. And I dialed my lawyer again. This time I said, let's begin. My lawyer's name was Sylvia Grant. She was sharp, blunt, and didn't flinch when I told her the whole story. From the late-night promise at the kitchen table to the betrayal in the office, she listened with the kind of silence that felt like focus, not doubt. So let me get this straight, she said, tapping her pen. They asked you to leave your career, promised ownership, and then handed it all to your brother? I nodded. She raised an eyebrow. Do you have anything in writing? I hesitated. Not formal paperwork, but I have emails, texts, voice notes, even a draft of an ownership agreement my mom sent me last year. The subject line was literally, ownership transfer. Let's review. Sylvia's eyes lit up. Then we have leverage. She explained something I hadn't even considered. What they did wasn't just unethical. It could be considered fraudulent inducement. They made a verbal and digital promise to gain years of free labor, then revoked it when the business became profitable again. That was more than just shady. It could be actionable. The thought of taking my family to court made my stomach churn. But when I opened the email from Mom sent just hours after the party, that churn turned to fire. Hope you're doing okay. Let's keep things peaceful and celebratory. So happy Evan is stepping into leadership. You'll always be welcome in the bakery. Welcome? Like I was some guest in a home I built. That same day, I returned to the bakery to pick up a few personal things I had left behind. A notebook, a hard drive, and a framed photo of Grandpa Walter that used to sit on my desk. I didn't expect a confrontation. I didn't expect anything. But Evan was there, feet on my desk, phone in hand, like he owned the place. Oh hey Rach, he said casually, not even looking up. Grabbing your stuff? I forced a nod. Yeah. He leaned back. Wild how things turned out, huh? I guess Mom and Dad were just waiting for the right moment. I stared at him. Do you honestly believe you deserve this? He shrugged. I mean, you did a lot, but let's be real. You just kept the place from falling apart. I'm the one who'll take it to the next level. That was all I needed to hear. That night, Sylvia filed our claim. We weren't suing for damages. We were going for equitable ownership. Based on my labor, the promises made, and the fact that without me, there wouldn't even be a Monroe's bakery left to argue over. The first response came quickly. A cold, stiff letter from my parents' lawyer. They denied everything. No promise of ownership. No acknowledgement of my strategic role. They claimed I was volunteering as a family member and had been compensated emotionally by living rent-free in their home. I almost laughed. I had paid for groceries, paid for the new espresso machine, covered staff bonuses from my own savings when we couldn't make payroll during the first holiday season. And now, they wanted to rewrite history like I'd been some cheerful helper. Evan didn't reach out. No calls, no texts, no apology, not even one of his trademark oops emojis. Sylvia wasn't surprised. This kind of betrayal doesn't happen in a vacuum, she told me. It's usually years in the making. You just weren't supposed to notice until it was too late. I started gathering every piece of proof I had. Old emails from my dad. One of them even said, hang in there, Rach. This will all be yours soon. You're the backbone of this place. Texts from my mom about finalizing paperwork. Shared Google Drive folders showing I was the only one uploading business plans, marketing decks, and vendor contacts. Voice messages from my dad asking for help with staffing. Even calendar invites that labeled me acting GM. It was all there. Sylvia built the case like an architect with steel beams. We filed under fraudulent inducement, unjust enrichment, and promissory estoppel, which basically meant they made a promise, I relied on it, and they broke it to their benefit. The hearing was scheduled. I still remember walking into that courthouse in my navy blazer, the one my mom used to call too serious for family dinners. My hands were shaking, but my spine was straight. Across the aisle, my parents sat stone-faced. My mother's mouth was tight. My father avoided eye contact. Evan didn't even show. The judge opened with a simple question to their lawyer. Was any formal ownership ever granted to Mr. Evan Monroe prior to profitability? There was a long pause. Their lawyer finally admitted, no, the transfer happened after the bakery returned to solvency. The judge nodded slowly. Interesting. Sylvia rose and delivered our opening statement with quiet, practiced confidence. Rachel Monroe wasn't just helping out, she said. She led operations, saved the business from financial ruin, and was repeatedly promised ownership in exchange. These are not opinions, they are documented facts. She handed over the emails, the texts, the audio recordings. One email stood out. My father's message just a year ago. I can't wait to put your name on the papers and make this official. You've earned it. Their lawyer tried to argue that family conversations didn't count as contracts, but the judge wasn't buying it. If she acted as a volunteer, the judge asked, why did you repeatedly promise her future ownership? Silence. Then my dad finally spoke. We didn't think she'd push it this far. Not we didn't promise her. Not she misunderstood. Just, we didn't expect her to fight back. And that was the moment I knew I'd already won something, even if the court hadn't ruled yet. I walked out of the hearing room and into the hallway, breathing like I hadn't in weeks. Later that night, I got a message from my aunt, Dad's younger sister. She'd seen the court filings. Rach, I had no idea. I'm so sorry. If you need anything, testimony, support, you've got it. Then came more messages. A former employee who said she'd always known I ran the place. A vendor offering to testify about how I negotiated when no one else would. A customer who posted, Monroe's bakery was Rachel. Without her, it's just another pastry shop. And suddenly, the silence that had surrounded me wasn't silence anymore. It was support. I wasn't asking for a favor. I wasn't trying to punish anyone. I was standing up for the truth, and I wasn't backing down. By the time the mediation date arrived, I had stopped hoping for an apology. Sylvia and I walked into a sleek downtown law office, neutral ground, they called it. The kind of place with soundproof walls and polished glass doors, where betrayals are settled like business deals, clean, quiet, and cold. I wore the same navy blazer, not for symbolism, but because it reminded me who I was before they tried to rewrite me out of my own life. My parents arrived together, Mom with that familiar tight-lipped look. Dad, with his shoulders hunched like gravity, had finally caught up with him. Evan didn't come, again. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe he just didn't want to see the sister he stepped on to climb a ladder he didn't build. The mediator, a silver-haired woman named Elaine, greeted us calmly. We're not here to debate feelings, she said. We're here to seek resolution, one that is fair, legal, and final. Sylvia opened with facts. No anger, no embellishment. She laid out every contribution I had made. Strategic initiatives, vendor contracts, marketing campaigns, all documented, all traceable. Then she slid a folder across the table, full of receipts, photos, screenshots, and side-by-side growth charts from the bakery's lowest point to profitability. Every line of revenue increase had my fingerprints on it. Their lawyer mumbled something about familial goodwill. Elaine raised an eyebrow. Did your daughter receive any financial compensation during the 4 years she worked full-time? Mom spoke. We let her stay in the house. I smiled coldly. You mean the house where I paid for groceries, maintenance, and half the utilities? Dad's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Elaine turned to him. Mr. Monroe, can you confirm whether there was ever an explicit promise made to Rachel about ownership? His voice was low. Yes, we told her it would be hers when things stabilized. We didn't think it would come to this. There it is, Sylvia said. Acknowledgement of a promise, and 4 years of labor in reliance on that promise. Elaine nodded. Let's talk resolution. My heart pounded. I wasn't here for revenge. I didn't want them humiliated. I wanted what I had earned. I want controlling interest, I said, looking them both in the eyes. Majority ownership, 51%. Evan can keep his share, but I'm running the shop. Mom looked stunned. You can't be serious. You gave everything to him, I said. Even though I rebuilt it, you pushed me out, and now you want me to settle for a title without power? No, this is my line. There was a long silence. Then, for the first time, Dad looked at me. Not as a daughter, but as someone who stood her ground. She's right, he said quietly. She earned it. Mom whipped her head toward him. Walter. No, he said. Firmer this time. We made a mistake. Elaine drafted the new agreement right there. I would be majority owner. Evan would remain operations manager with 49%. I would have full decision-making authority over branding, hiring, strategy, and finances. They had 30 days to sign the legal transfer. It wasn't a win. It was justice. When we left the office, the air outside felt different, like the city itself had exhaled. Sylvia turned to me. You did it. I nodded, but I didn't smile. Not yet. Not until my name's on that deed. 30 days passed. The ink dried. The documents were filed with the county clerk, Rachel Monroe, majority owner of Monroe's Bakery. When I stepped back into the shop as its legal leader, the atmosphere shifted. The baristas looked up with cautious glances. The assistant baker, Miguel, paused mid-roll of dough, uncertain. I raised a hand. Nothing changes for you. Your jobs are safe. We move forward with honesty and respect. They nodded. Some even smiled. Evan, however, didn't look at me the first 2 days. He clocked in late, took long breaks, and avoided eye contact. But on Friday, he knocked on my office door. I didn't handle this right, he said, standing awkwardly, hands in his hoodie pocket. And I didn't deserve it. You did. I studied him for a moment. He looked smaller. Maybe guilt had finally found him. I know, I said. He waited for more, but I wasn't giving a speech. Sometimes the truth is enough. My parents didn't visit, not for weeks. Until one Saturday, Mom showed up alone. No warning. She stood at the counter like a stranger, looking out of place in her pearls and too expensive coat. I just came to see it, she said. You mean the business you gave away, then tried to erase me from? Her eyes welled, but no tears fell. We thought we were doing what was best. It's tradition, father to son. And you thought I'd just keep smiling and baking in the background? She didn't answer. I'm not angry anymore, I said. But I'm not forgetting either. She nodded slowly, then left without saying another word. And somehow, that was enough closure. Monroe's Bakery thrived in the months that followed. I launched a seasonal menu with help from local artisans, started weekend baking workshops, partnered with a nonprofit to donate leftover goods. The community responded with enthusiasm and loyalty. For the first time, it felt like mine. Not borrowed, not promised, owned. Sometimes young women would stop by after class or on lunch break and ask, "How did you have the guts to stand up to your family?" And I'd always tell them the same thing. I didn't feel brave. I just got tired of shrinking. Because that's the truth. This wasn't a fairy tale about winning back a crown. It was about carving your name into something that was yours all along. And I wasn't done yet. 6 weeks after I became majority owner of Monroe's Bakery, the headlines faded, the whispers died down, and life started to settle into a new rhythm. But peace didn't last long. It started with the finances. First, a shipment of ingredients arrived with the wrong quantities. Then a payment to our delivery partner mysteriously bounced, even though the account had more than enough funds. I double-checked the books, called the bank, and realized something had been changed. Someone had accessed our business accounts. The bank logs pointed to Evan's login. When I confronted him, he denied it. Maybe I left my computer open, he shrugged. It's not like I'm trying to sabotage anything. But I'd seen the timestamps. He had logged in after hours, twice. That night, I changed all the passwords, locked down permissions, and moved half the working capital into a secure sub-account only I could access. The next morning, Evan was 10 minutes late again. You're testing me, I told him quietly in the office. No, he snapped. I'm just tired of being micromanaged like a kid. You're acting like one. He slammed the door on his way out. And that's when I realized this wasn't over. I had won the title, but Evan was going to test every inch of the ground I stood on. Later that week, I overheard him whispering with 2 baristas in the kitchen. When I walked in, they went silent. One of them, Tasha, avoided my eyes. That night, I got a text from Tasha. I don't want to be involved in anything shady. Just letting you know Evan's been saying stuff about how you stole the bakery. Thought you should know. The next day, Miguel, the assistant baker, came to me and said Evan had offered him a bonus to stay loyal if things change again. I was furious, but not surprised. He wasn't just acting out. He was staging a quiet coup. I met with Sylvia that evening and laid everything out. The financial tampering, the gossip, the manipulation. We gave him 49%, I said, pacing her office. And now he's acting like he owns the whole damn place. He's baiting you, Sylvia said. trying to make you overreact so he can cry unfair treatment. Don't give him the headline he wants. Build your case. So I did. I started documenting everything. Every shift he skipped, every supplier complaint, every delayed invoice, every team meeting he missed. And I talked to the team, not as a boss, but as a human. I explained the new protocols, opened space for feedback, and offered raises to staff who had stayed through the mess. People responded. They stayed. Evan didn't like that. The breaking point came on a Saturday morning. It was busy. Our new weekend market stall had drawn a huge crowd, and I was manning the register myself when a woman stormed in holding a cake box. "This is inedible," she snapped. "I ordered this for a retirement party and it tastes like salt and cardboard." I apologized immediately and offered a refund. But when I checked the order slip, I froze. Evan had made it. He had filled the wrong ingredients and marked it complete. Later that afternoon, I pulled him aside. "You messed up that cake, Evan. It cost us a customer." He smirked. "Maybe if you stopped treating me like an intern, I'd care more." That was it. I looked him straight in the eye and said, "You're suspended. Effective immediately. We'll review your future with the business in 10 days. "You can't do that," he said, his voice rising. "I'm still part owner." "But I'm majority," I said calmly. "Which means I have the legal right to remove you from day-to-day operations. Check your contract." That night, I sat in my apartment with the bakery's financial reports open in one tab and Evan's employee records in another. He hadn't improved operations. He hadn't developed a single new product. In fact, since his involvement, productivity had slipped, staff turnover increased, and complaints had risen. And yet he still thought the title made him untouchable. I called Sylvia. "I want to initiate a review of his ownership rights," I said. "If he continues to harm the business, I want him out, legally." "It's possible," she replied, "if we can prove breach of fiduciary duty or sustained damage to the company. But it won't be easy. Nothing worth saving ever is." 3 days into Evan's suspension, I got an email from a local reporter. She wanted to do a piece on female-owned family businesses that survived internal power struggles. I almost declined. But then I thought about all the women who never fought back, who stayed quiet when they were erased, and who never got their names on the sign out front, so I agreed. The article ran the following Sunday with the headline, "From Betrayal to Breakthrough, How Rachel Monroe Took Back Her Family Bakery." The story went viral in the local community. By Monday morning, we had a line out the door. That afternoon, Evan sent a text. "So now you're using the press to play the victim?" I didn't reply, because this wasn't about him anymore. It never really was. It was about something bigger than blood or business. It was about truth. And I was just getting started. 10 days into Evan's suspension, Monroe's bakery had never run smoother. Sales were up. Customers were coming back in waves. Staff morale had lifted, and for the first time in months, the kitchen buzzed with focused energy, not whispered tension. But just when I thought we'd hit a rhythm, the retaliation began. It started with a notice from a supplier, one we'd worked with for years, saying they were reconsidering future business due to internal disputes. I knew Evan had reached out to them, probably fed them some sob story about being wronged, framed, betrayed. Then came the rumors. A food blogger posted an anonymous tip about shady legal dealings at a popular local bakery. The article didn't name names, but everyone knew who it was about. The tone? Suspicious, slanderous, loaded with innuendo. That same week, our Yelp page was hit with a wave of one-star reviews, all from new accounts with no review history. Some mentioned mold, others accused us of discrimination. Fake, all of it, and I knew exactly who was behind it. Evan wasn't attacking my ownership now, he was attacking my reputation. But I had prepared for this. I wasn't going to be blindsided again. I filed a defamation complaint. I contacted the blogger, offering transparency and proof. She updated the post, quietly, carefully, then took it down altogether. But the damage had been done. Some regulars were hesitant. Others stopped showing up. I had to fight back, with the truth. The next week, I hosted a community night at the bakery. Free samples, live music, and a Meet the Maker session where I shared the bakery's journey. Not the scandal, not the lawsuit. Just the real story. How we recovered from near bankruptcy, modernized the business, and stayed open during hard times. I didn't mention Evan by name, but I didn't have to. People knew. And more importantly, They felt the energy shift. They knew who was showing up at 5 a.m. to fire up the ovens. They knew who was working the register, kneading dough, making deliveries in the rain. And it wasn't Evan. That night, a local teacher stopped me on her way out. "You're the reason this place still exists," she said. "Don't let anyone take that from you." I didn't plan to, but Evan wasn't finished. The next morning I got an email from a lawyer. Not Sylvia, not mine, his. He was filing a formal motion, a petition to force a sale of my majority stake on the grounds of hostile leadership and intentional exclusion of a co-owner. I stared at the screen in disbelief. Hostile? Exclusion? He sabotaged orders, spread rumors, tanked supplier relationships, and now he wanted to paint me as the villain? Sylvia reviewed the documents and frowned. "It's thin, aggressive but flimsy. He's playing the long game, hoping to wear you down." "I'm not tired," I said. But the truth was, I was. Running the bakery, managing staff, keeping up appearances. It was a full-time job. Fighting a legal war at the same time? It was draining every part of me. Still, I couldn't stop now. Because Evan's real goal wasn't to win. It was to make me quit. To make me doubt myself enough to walk away. But he forgot something important. I didn't come back to save Monroe's for him. I came back because it was my legacy too. So I hit back, hard. Sylvia filed a counter-motion citing breach of fiduciary duty, highlighting Evan's sabotage, his manipulation of vendors, and the online smear campaign. We submitted affidavits from staff, customers, even the blogger. We showed patterns, dates, screenshots. Evan had tried to destroy the very thing he claimed to love. And the judge noticed. At the next hearing, he didn't even look Evan in the eye. "I suggest both parties prepare for a full review of conduct and contribution," he said. "Because this isn't about inheritance or family. It's about accountability." And that was the crack. Not in my case. In Evan's. After the hearing, I found a letter on my desk. No envelope, just folded once and signed Dad. "Rachel, I didn't know things would go this far. We never meant to hurt you. But tradition is a hard thing to unlearn. You made the bakery what it is. And if I had to choose again, I'd choose differently. I'm sorry. Dad." It should have meant something, but it didn't. Not now. The time for letters was long gone. Later that week, Evan showed up outside the shop. First time since the suspension. He didn't come in, just stood across the street, watching. I didn't flinch. I went back inside, rolled up my sleeves, and got back to work. Because I knew one thing now, without a doubt. He could try to break my name. But he'd never touch the work I built. 3 months after Evan filed his last desperate motion, we walked into court for the final time. This wasn't just another hearing, it was the last stand. The courtroom was quiet, almost reverent. The kind of silence that knows something's about to shift. I wore the same navy blazer I wore to the first hearing, not for luck, but for symbolism. I was the same woman, but stronger, sharper, no longer hoping for validation, only ready to claim what was mine. Evan sat across the aisle, flanked by his high-priced legal team, still trying to wear confidence like a suit that never quite fit. He wouldn't look at me. He didn't have to, because the judge did. And today, the judge had read everything. All the filings, all the documentation, all the receipts. He cleared his throat and spoke in a calm, firm tone. After reviewing both parties' contributions, conduct, and the full scope of operations at Monroe's bakery, he said, "The court finds that Miss Rachel Monroe is entitled to sole ownership based on breach of fiduciary duty, fraudulent misrepresentation, and unjust enrichment by the defendant, Mr. Evan Monroe." Evan's head dropped. His attorney didn't even blink. "The court orders a full transfer of ownership within 30 days. Mr. Monroe is to forfeit all equity and vacate the premises. Additionally, he is liable for damages incurred during his tenure, amounting to $118,000. Silence. Then, the sound of a pen scraping as the judge signed the final order. Just like that, it was done. No dramatic shouting, no fists on tables, just legal, binding truth. I had won. After court, I stepped outside into the crisp autumn air. I didn't cry. I didn't cheer. I just closed my eyes and breathed. For the first time in over a year, I wasn't in survival mode. I was free. Free from the betrayal. Free from the games. Free from the idea that being family meant swallowing your worth. A few reporters stood across the courthouse steps. One raised a mic. "Miss Monroe, any comment?" I shook my head gently, because this was never about headlines. It was about closure. The next morning I arrived at Monroe's bakery at 5 a.m. Same sidewalk, same key, but everything felt new. The first thing I did was take down the outdated founder's wall near the back hallway, the one that listed Evan's name in bold and mine as a tiny consultant. Then I opened a box from my car and hung up a framed print of the original 1962 Monroe's storefront. And beneath it, a new plaque, rebuilt by Rachel Monroe 2023. Because legacies aren't inherited, they're earned. Over the next month, I poured myself into reviving the bakery, not just as a business, but as a community hub. We launched a rotating artisan feature, highlighting small local food vendors and women-owned brands. We hosted open kitchen nights, where customers could watch how our recipes came to life. We started a mentorship program for young women in culinary school. The bakery had always been warm. Now it was alive. I didn't hear from Evan, but I heard about him. Word spread quickly. He'd tried pitching a startup idea to investors, but no one bit. His name had become synonymous with legal baggage and burned bridges. At first I felt sorry for him. Then I remembered how he looked when he stood behind my counter in my apron with a smug grin and no shame, and I didn't feel sorry anymore. I felt whole. One afternoon, a young woman, early 20s, nerves in her eyes, walked into the bakery with a portfolio under her arm. "Are you the owner?" she asked. I nodded. "I am." She smiled, relieved. "I read about your story in the Small Business Journal. I'm starting a bakery, too. Everyone says I'm crazy, but you made me believe it's possible." I sat down with her, and for the first time I told the story. Not as a survivor, but as a teacher. Because there's power in sharing what nearly broke you, and what didn't. She left with a list of supplier contacts, my personal number, and a hug. I watched her go and thought, this is why I fought. Not for bread, not even for legacy, but for permission, to be seen, to be believed, and to be respected. The next week I got a letter in the mail. No return address. But I recognized the handwriting. It was from Dad. "Rachel, I heard the ruling. I don't have the right words. Just, I hope one day you'll understand we thought we were doing what was best. We were wrong. And I'm proud of you. Dad." This time I let it sink in. And then I folded the letter, placed it in a drawer, and went back to kneading dough. Forgiveness is earned, and some debts take more than ink to settle. But I wasn't angry anymore. I had turned grief into grit, and betrayal into boundaries. Now, when people walk into Monroe's bakery, they don't just smell cinnamon and sugar. They feel something else. Strength, resilience, and a woman who refused to be written out.